Thank you, Gahirlach. Minister, I'll start with Amendment 8, which I think is the crux of the issue in terms of the IAS pension scheme and others, and that's the single insolvency situation. And this does stem from, as my colleague Senator O'Brien said, from the legislation that you brought through the House, in which we opposed in the time, in the Social Welfare Bill. The OECD have made a recommendation that a scheme should not be allowed to close a defined benefit pension scheme unless it has received a minimum 90% funding standard. I know we put forward this amendment last year as well in anticipation of what would happen with the IAS scheme. You rejected it at that stage, but I do hope that given the consultations that you've had with IAS members and the correspondence that you've been receiving, the meeting that you had with them personally as well, that you will come to this debate with a more open mind. Whatever about a situation where there's a double insolvency and both the scheme and the company are insolvent. To be able to close down a scheme where, in a single solvency situation, against the advice of the OECD, which, as I said, recommends that there be 90% funding, instead what we have in our legislation is that there's no minimum funding requirement, and we're seeing the impact of that now. And I agree with comments that were made earlier, where the IAS scheme is just the first scheme that's being hit by this, but the template that has been set out in your legislation and in the Shannon Airport Bill brought to you by the Minister for Transport provides a template for future savage cuts on members of other pension schemes. I think it's a really dangerous departure. It's extraordinarily unfair. It's unfair in the IAS scheme both to pensioners who, as Senator O'Brien mentioned, are losing 6 weeks worth of their pension every year. 6 weeks, it's a phenomenal cut. More savage than any of the social welfare cuts or other cuts that have been brought through this House. To lose 6 weeks' pay a year is a huge amount for somebody to lose on a pension when they're already, as Senator Nair said, on a reduced income. And then you have active and deferred members who are losing 50–60% of their pension. I think it's absolutely extraordinary, particularly for people, as Senator O'Brien said, who are on low income. These are not well-off pensioners. These are people, many of them on very, very modest incomes, who worked for a long time, who made contributions. The active and deferred people, many of them were persuaded to leave the company and to assist with the restructuring the company on the basis that they would have their pension benefits preserved. And now they're finding that that promise isn't worth anything, and they're losing 50–60% of their pension. I know you met some of the individuals involved. I do hope, Minister, at this stage you'll show some heart and do something about this. It is within your power. I don't know how anybody could, yourself or anybody else, could listen to their story and not be moved by it. I think it's absolutely incredible that any government, but particularly that a Labour and government, would preside over such a savage cut to people's pension entitlements, people who it's too late for them to make up that income elsewhere. You have active members who, many of them are within months of actually reaching retirement age, and they're having their pensions cut by 60%. That's extraordinarily uncruel and unfair. Senator Conan mentions the Waterford Crystal resolution, and I welcome the fact that that issue has finally been resolved. But of course we have a bizarre situation now where the Waterford Crystal workers, again in a double insolvency situation, so in a far worse situation for the company, are actually better off now than IAS members. The Waterford members have had to fight through the courts to get their entitlement and to get to that position. But after all of that, you now have Waterford pensioners who are better off than the IAS members. And I think you should take pause, Minister, and reflect on that. Does that mean that the only way that the IAS members will get their entitlement is to take a similar legal action and to be arguing with the state? I was at the BRASA AGM last week where they were talking about that as one of the options that's on the table, is that they're going to have to get legal advice and take the state on legally on this issue. And while I know the direct facts of the Waterford case are different in that it's a double insolvency rather than a single one, and it refers to the active and referred members rather than pensioners. A lot of the principles are the same, and there is EU protection there for pensioners, for cross-border schemes, for all of that, and I wonder if you have taken that into account in the wake of the resolution of the Waterford issue. As Senator O'Brien said, ideally we'd like to see you roll back on this, see the injustice in cutting people's pensions so severely, particularly in an insolvency situation. If that's not possible and you're not willing to implement the OECD recommendation for the scheme to be 90% funded for the IAS scheme, then we have put forward what we believe are fairer alternatives in terms of distribution of pension benefits, and to ensure that there's fairer protection for people. So in Amendment 11, we set out criteria that would apply instead and would give people fair protection, where be amending the Social Welfare and Pensions Act that was brought in last year, the number 2 bill from 2013, to ensure that the reduction in preserved benefits for members with accrued service in excess of 20 years, would be made as follows. So first, where the annual amount is 12,000 or less, no reduction will be made. I think that's a very, very modest pension, so no reduction will be made from that amount. Secondly, where the annual amount is greater than 12,000 but less than 60,000, the reduction in such amount would not exceed 10%. And where the annual amount is 60,000 or more, the reduction would not exceed 20%. We think that's much fairer. It does mean that it's in line with how much money people actually have, but it provides stronger protection for those on the lowest incomes. And the amendment also provides that the reduction that I referred to earlier would result in the annual amount being reduced, where the reduction under the scheme that I've already set out would result in the annual amount being reduced to less than 12,000. That reduced shall operate to reduce the annual amount to 12,000, and the annual amount is 60,000 or more, where the annual amount is 60,000 or more, and the reduction under the scheme that I've just set out would result in it being brought down to less than 54,000, then the reduction shall operate to reduce it just to 54. So all of that is based on ensuring greater fairness. We think it is a much fairer system than what you have in place. Our other amendment deals with the issue of having an appeal process. I think it's an important aspect of natural justice under our constitution, that people have an ability to appeal decisions that affect them. They shouldn't have to go through the courts to do that. We should actually provide in our procedures that there's an open and fair appeals process. And again, Amendment number 9 sets out to do that. So I second the remarks that have been made by Senator O'Brien in respect of each of these amendments. And I do hope, Minister, that having consulted with the members of the IAS scheme and listened to how these changes are affecting them personally and the great unfairness that is being brought in, I do hope that you will act before it's too late and have a proper debate with us, find a fairer solution and find a way that doesn't leave people on low incomes ending up in a situation where they've lost 60% of their pension.